Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show, we have Scott Stevenson. He's CEO of Spellbook. And in your career, Scott, you've done quite a few things leading to this. Why don't you talk about Spellbook a bit and introduce yourself?
Thanks for having me, John. Yeah, so I come from an engineering and product background. I've kind of just been building things my whole life, or attempting to build things. Most of them did not work out. I started wanting to make video games, and I made a lot of unfinished, terrible video games, like music production. I eventually started like a musical instrument company, electronic music instrument company. That failed. We got a really big legal bill while I had that instrument company, and that inspired me to want to make legal services more efficient and affordable. And then we started a company called Rally about 6-7 years ago. And then that eventually evolved to become Spellbook. Spellbook is probably the one thing that's been successful out of all of that. We were the very first generative AI co-pilot for lawyers in the whole world. We serve over 3,000 legal teams in over 50 countries today. For folks following AI, they might have heard of like Cursor. Cursor is sort of like the AI tool that software developers use to build software. We're kind of like that, but for lawyers, particularly transactional lawyers. So yeah, that's a bit of what we've been up to so far.
Okay, very cool. So you went from the musical product was called Mooney or Moon?
I called it Mune. Yeah.
Mune. So that might have been your first problem. Nobody could find it.
Yeah, no one could pronounce it.
Yeah.
Or find it. Yeah.
So that's an interesting move. So you went from video games. So you went from creative into, I don't want to say that working with lawyers isn't creative, but it's definitely not video games and musical instruments. Yeah. And I think that's a familiar path to a lot of folks. They get into tech wanting to make like a cool game or a really, really, really nice app. And then they realize that the difficulty of doing that and selling that, it kind of dwarfs the possibility of just making a tool that somebody will pay you for. When did you figure that out? When did you figure out that, hey, instead of making things that I really have to convince people to buy, that I can make something that people will just line up for?
Yeah, you described that realization very well. I think the other thing I had considered was, I consider myself like a creative first, and I always just wanted to make things and find a path where I would be able to make things and sustain myself at the same time. Yeah, starting with video games are incredibly difficult to make, and there's a lot of competition. It's a really, really tough industry. The wages are not amazing. And then I loved music as well, and I loved the idea of making this new musical instrument. But then I also realized like the economics of it. I met one of my heroes in the electronic music instrument industry, guy who invented one of the first digital drum machines. And, I met him at a conference. I was so excited to meet him. And, his company was still only 2 people. He was very passionate. He had a lot to be proud of.
Like Lindrum what was it? What was it?
Yeah,
Lindrum?
It was Roger Lynn. Yeah.
Okay.
Roger Lynn, the Lindrum. And
wow.
He was a hero of mine. And I still is. But I saw his path and I was like, that's super cool. But his company still only had 2 employees when I had met him. And I was like, wow, like, put in a lot of work, and I was like, I don't know if I'm able to like sustain myself that long without being able to hire more people and grow something a little bit bigger. I think for me, I also just didn't know if it was the way I could make an impact. Obviously, the digital drum machine had a pretty big impact in the world. I didn't know if what I was working on would really have a similar impact. Our thesis with that musical instrument was that, electronic music wasn't really well appreciated by sort of more traditional audiences at the time, or classical audiences, where, you'd see like a DJ play and you'd be like, are they just pushing the play button, or something? There's something more going on. And at the time, we thought there was an opportunity to expose like how much an electronic musician could do on stage. So we were trying to fuse like a traditional instrument and an electronic instrument together into a new package that would let the audience in on more of that like cause and effect that a performer can have. And I think it was a cool thing. I think you see a lot more of that live electronic music performance today using other techniques that people eventually figured out. I just don't know if there was really a need for, a business there or for me to be part of that. So I think what motivated me the most is like, where could I have the biggest impact that with my skills and my experience would do something for people or change the trajectory of the world just a little bit for the better. And I I came to the conclusion it was probably not through, I was probably not good enough at making video games to do that. I probably didn't have an idea for an electronic music instrument that was going to change how people perform music forever.
Well,
But I,
you probably could have just put out like a piece of wood and just
yeah,
had like, and just said, just tap this while you're on stage and just press play.
sure. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Which would have been,
Would have been
which would have had
different.
a,
Yeah.
yeah, that would have been a similar
Yeah.
effect. Interesting.
But I did have, I was really interested in legal, and I did see this big problem where we had at one point got a legal bill. We were doing some like IP protection stuff. We're considering like licensing what we'd built to other instrument manufacturers. And at one point we got this legal bill that just literally took half the money out of our bank account. And I was like, wow, that seems like a really big problem that no one has solved. And I don't see anyone who has figured this out yet. Like, I think a lot of people who have had their first legal bill, especially in business, are like, holy shit, like this is like way more expensive than anything else that I pay for. And
Hmm.
I don't feel like I got the right amount of value for the money that I paid. So I got really focused on like, I think there's a big problem here that I have the skills to really make an impact. I think that was true, but then it took a long time. I think we were right. We selected a problem that was unsolved, that needed to be figured out so that more entrepreneurs could access legal services and things like that. But then it took us, years more to actually figure out a solution that would actually really impact
Yeah, you
where it
mentioned
would
you had
work.
like hundred web pages that that you'd built just to get
Yeah.
some clients.
Yeah. So over the course of about 3 years, so we wanted to automate kind of routine drudgery in legal work and, like routine document drafting. Like if a small business, a coffee shop needs an employment agreement, you know, they shouldn't have to pay for that employment agreement to be drafted from scratch. And it really shouldn't cost that much money to get like a basic employment agreement. So we wanted to automate that, a lot of the drudgery there. And we launched, from that point, we launched like a contract templating engine. Originally, we went around lawyers, then we sold it to lawyers. And we basically had literally over 100 variations of the product we were offering and the message that we had that we launched over the course of about 3 years. Every 2 weeks, we would put up a new web page, new ads, do some like different spin on our product and see if we could build something that people were like grabbing out of our hands, that was
Hmm.
cutting through the noise. It's a very noisy world. And that was like a very humbling process. We kept the company extremely lean during that time. We had raised a small amount of like venture capital, and some of the VCs were like, "Why aren't you spending the money?" And we were like, "We don't think we have anything that special yet that people really want. We don't want to just force a product down people's throats that isn't really solving their problem that much." We sold our early product to like 100 law firms, and it was okay. It was doing okay. But I still think a lot of the core drudgery that lawyers do was unsolved. And then generative AI came along, and I used GitHub Copilot. I'm like a software engineer. GitHub Copilot was like the first real like generative AI Copilot that came out. And it just totally changed my workflow overnight. And I was like,
Hmm.
wow, this is really cool because whatever I'm programming, it's immediately giving me help along the way. And I don't have to like set anything up. I don't have to configure it. And then, we said, let's build something similar for lawyers. We think this is what they need. And then within 3 months, we had 30,000 signups on our wait list. And, just kind of after years of just like trying to push the boulder and it rolling back on us, we just started growing massively. We grew like 12x that year and then 3x the year after. And now we have the most customers of any company in the category and are continuing to grow really quickly.
Could you sense that you were going to hit that tipping point? I mean, a lot of people, like I spoke to the guy who started FreeWrite, which is a device that's like it's a writing device, and it's actually a piece of
Mhm.
hardware too, which is actually really hard, as you said. And he knew almost immediately as soon as he released this, as soon as he even put up the Kickstarter, he got
Mhm.
like 500,000 signups or something like that, and he
Yeah.
knew that was exactly right. Did you have an inkling that would happen before you started, or did it feel differently than some of your other
Yeah.
projects?
We knew almost immediately. And because we had failed so many times, that's why we knew so quickly. We knew what a failure looked like. And it was just totally different. The moment we started showing what we had built to lawyers, it was a night and day reaction where there's a really good article by NFX. It's called Find the Fast Moving Water. And it talks about this. I don't know if you've seen this, but it talks about the first time an investor saw, I think, Cabulous, which was like a precursor to Uber. And he talks about like this neurochemical response he had to seeing it the first time. Whereas like his pupils are dilating. It's like there's a literal neurochemical response going on when you see something new that's shifting how you see the future and how your life is going to continue in the future.
Hmm.
And we just saw that on every call when we showed it to a lawyer. They were just like, holy cow, like something massive is about to change in the way I do my work. And I don't really understand what it is, but I've never seen anything like this before. And when we launched, this was before ChatGPT. So none of these lawyers had even seen ChatGPT before.
Okay.
So they were just like, yeah, it was a really different reaction. So like one of my pieces of advice I give to folks going down this road of like trying to build like a venture-backed software company is like, you really should wait until you get that reaction. Like I think a lot of companies scale, the tale is as old as time of like just kind of scaling and raising a bunch of money before you have that kind of product market fit. And we had to have a lot of faith that we could get that level of product market fit. And some of our investors were like, "What? You're just chasing a mirage. You're never going to build something that gets that kind of reaction out of people where they're just grabbing the product out of your hands." But we waited and we conserved cash and we did get there, and it was the right
Yeah,
decision.
that's an interesting point. What was it in you that said I couldn't sell these video games, I couldn't sell this musical product, lots of other stuff kind of failed for me. What encouraged you to, I guess, to quote the title, keep going? Why did you think that you'd be able to pull it off?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, and it's a question I've heard from other like founders a lot.
And I
So, I
sense
mean,
you're Canadian. I sense you're Canadian, so you're not allowed to to be boastful. So this is going to be
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, what kept us going? So, yeah, I am Canadian. Yeah, I think about this a lot, and it's probably the number one question I would get from people who are like starting their journey. I think it's the hardest question for any. It's like it is the question that keeps you up at night and that churns your guts. It's like, should I keep going, or am I wasting my life? And with the musical instrument, that really stressed me out a lot, and because I'd raised a tiny amount of angel money for that project, and I'd invested a lot of time in it with the team. But the thing I couldn't convince myself that the impact would be worth it. I just didn't see this becoming really. I could see it being a cool product that existed for 5 years, but I just couldn't envision it like totally changing how music is performed. The way the original digital drum machine did, or the original drum machine did. So what kept me going with Spellbook was I knew that huge problem was there, and it wasn't going away until someone solved it. Of like, legal services are radically inefficient; they're way too expensive. 70% of people do not feel they can call a lawyer if something comes up. They're just like, it's too expensive. It's like $800 an hour, $1,000 an hour now to get a good lawyer on something. That that is really what kept me going, is the belief in the problem, having experienced the problem myself. Also there's this idea that like, if a problem is hard to solve, that's actually a really good thing, because if it was easy to solve, it would have been solved already. That's like one of the learnings from like the book Zero to One came out around 2014, controversial author, but I think it's a great book, and it did influence my thinking at the time. It talks a lot about how, a good opportunity has to be spiky like a chestnut. You want to look for hard problems that seem kind of crazy and kind of really difficult to solve, because otherwise it would be already solved. So I think that belief that, yes, we had found a hard, spiky problem that no one had figured out, and that if we just kept hammering on it, the juice would be worth the squeeze, is what really kept us going. That faith that like, no, this is a real problem. Yes, this needs to be solved. Someone's going to figure it out eventually. And the harder the problem is to solve, kind of the better it is to go after, because it means you're going to have less competition and things like that. So that's what kept going. And I think that's really important as an entrepreneur, to deeply, deeply, deeply believe in the problem that you're solving. Because I think a lot of the entrepreneurial burnout comes out to, you raised a whole bunch of venture capital, and, there's a bunch of people relying on you to make, they're like $50 million investment worthwhile. And deep down, you don't believe in the problem. That's a really horrible place to be, which thankfully I've never been in. But I think that's like the worst place to be. So
That sounds
believing
so.
deeply in the problem is important.
Yeah, I don't want to go back. I don't want to keep harping on the music instrument idea, but did you see the problem there is not worth solving, or did you see somebody like Roger Lynn, who is like still eating gravel after literally changing the face of most music? He was still nobody. I mean, the fact that I knew his name, the fact that I know the Lindrum, is just that I'm into EDM recently, but I can't
Yeah.
imagine that anybody outside of us two on this around us knows the name.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think like the personal reward. I mean, I think he has probably done pretty well. I have no idea how the economics have
Hmm.
totally worked
Well, they're
for
expensive.
him.
They're expensive devices, right? So it's like,
Yeah, so I mean, it's probably worked out okay, and I'm sure he feels good about the impact he's had. But yeah, it did look challenging. It looked like a really hard path to me
it looked
from the
challenging, and
outside. Yeah, it looked like
it
there was
wasn't
maybe
worth.
easier paths for me to go at least. Yeah.
But it wasn't worth it wasn't worth the challenge. Would you say, if
Yeah,
that makes
and I
sense? I'm
also
trying to,
didn't think I
yeah.
could make anything comparably impactful. Yeah, I
Hmm.
didn't. I had no ideas that were comparably impactful.
Interesting.
What I
Yeah, I mean
think
that.
when I started, I really wanted to make cool stuff. I wanted to make art and music, and I still see myself. Someday after this company is sold, maybe I'll go back to making art. Like a video game is sort of a expression of art. I think, at least like an indie game. But I don't know. I wanted to venture beyond just making cool stuff that is like temporarily cool for a moment in time to seeing like, could I make something with a more permanent impact on the world?
And the only reason why I ask this is because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, or I talk to folks who do want to be creative. They do want to be artists, musicians, writers, and then settle for
Mm,
a career that might be completely different and not
yeah.
creative at all. What it feels like you've achieved, which is very admirable, is that you've gone from using the tools that you learned in your artistic endeavors to build a company, because and be very, very careful about it too. You got experience from literally failing a few times to say, I'm not going to spend all this money because we're going to shut down our company too quickly, and I'm going to wait until I see something that's as impactful as the Lindrum for
Mhm.
lawyers, which is a really interesting way of thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's how it went down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so what, yeah, go ahead.
And I was going to say, yeah, it is hard to, I do really want to go back to, I would love to go back to, making games or music, something like that. I still get a lot out of that. It is also just economically very difficult, to go down sort of like the art life. Yeah. So maybe this will also be eventually an economic path to being able to
Hmm.
spend more time on some of those things myself.
So what's going on with Storybook this year? Anything changing?
A lot of things. So we are a bunch of things. So AI agents are coming out. We have a new product called Spellbook Associate. Spellbook Associate is, I don't know, I guess you've been following the agent buzz. It's kind of like a very junior lawyer that can help you with more complex multi-document tasks, or help a lawyer with more complex multi-document tasks. So give it a set of documents for a complex transaction, and it will go and cross-reference all the documents and manipulate them for you. I think that's going to be pretty huge. I think probably within 2 years, or maybe 5 years, 2 to 5 years, every lawyer will be working with like literal AI colleagues. Like every lawyer will have an AI colleague that they're emailing, that they're sending Slack messages to. And so we're going on that path with our new product, Spellbook Associate. We're also spending a lot of time on market data for contracts. One of the things that's really challenging is contract negotiation, and how it tends to go today is you have lawyers kind of yelling at each other on like what a normal contract looks like, and one has more power than the other. People end up sort of just sort of accepting whatever the person with more power wants in the contract a lot of the time. And I think we're going to go to a world with AI now where negotiation becomes very data driven. So if
Hmm.
I'm signing like a lease in New York City in February 2025, I would actually be able to compare it to like every other lease, or the average lease in New York City, February 2025, and be like, oh, the lease that I'm being asked to sign by this landlord, it's actually has this clause in it, which is really unfair to me that, 99% of leases don't have
Wow.
um, at this time. So that's another big focus of ours right now, is moving towards like I would call data driven negotiation, where rather than lawyers yelling at each other, everyone can kind of center around the data and be like, this is what's normal. And it's kind of just like market dynamics. Like if I want to buy like Facebook stock or something, I can look up the price of Facebook stock, and there's no haggling over the price. I know what the fair price of Facebook stock is right now. And I think that's going to happen with contracts as well. It's going to
Interesting.
be a lot less haggling, and it's going to be like, no, this is the normal commercial lease, or this is the normal residential lease in New York City right now. We should probably just sign that.
So you're draining the albeit slightly shady creativity out of the contract process. So you're going
Yeah.
completely the opposite way. Interesting. Very
Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for joining us. This has been fascinating.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right.
It's great to chat.
This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.